Thank you.
Do you want me to call?
Yeah, I think we're all set to go.
Hey, we're ready to start planning and development now? Okay.
Alderman Rainey. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 1st meeting of the Planning and Development Committee. We're happy that you're here tonight. It's about 7:18 in the evening, and there is a quorum. And the first item on our agenda is the approval of workshop meeting minutes of March 2nd, 2013. Is there a motion?
Approval.
Is there any changes or additions? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then we're going to move on to approval of regular meeting minutes of March 11th, 2013. Is there a motion? And any changes or additions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All righty. Our first item for consideration tonight is P1. It's Ordinance 41013, granting a special use for a Type 2 restaurant at 1629 Orrington Avenue, the Naf Grill. Zoning Board of Appeals and City staff recommend the adoption of Ordinance 41013, granting a special use permit for the operation of a Type 2 restaurant, Naf Grill, at 1629 Orrington Avenue. It's for introduction.
Move approval.
There's a second? Second. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Alderman Fisk, if I could, there are representatives here from the restaurant,
Okay.
Mr. Rob Farrar, and also a member of ownership as well.
Okay. Good evening. Would you like to come up and introduce yourselves or have anything to say?
Yes, hi. I'm Justin Halpany. I'm one of the partners at Naf Grill.
And I'm Rod Farrar. I'm the project manager for the development of the Naf Grill.
Well, we're happy you're here, and we wish you all the success.
We're excited.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very
good.
much. Thank you.
Okay, this was pretty easy, wasn't it?
This is good. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
Alderman Rainey.
Yes, I just want to tell the committee that months and months and months ago, Ibrahim Shahadi told me that there's this fabulous new concept called Naf Grill, and that I ought to do something to get them to come to Howard Street. Well, I guess they didn't get the message. But as long as you're here, You're also in the shopping center where the International Fresh Market is, in the where Walmart is, over on Toohey.
Yes, we're right on Toohey and Niles.
And is that store doing well?
Very well. Knock on wood. It's doing very well, and we hope the same success here. So everybody, have a sandwich.
You came with a good recommendation, that's for sure.
Mr. Abraham is our landlord
Oh, really?
on Washington Street.
As
Mr. Wilson's already aware of our concept by his office. So, and that's how Mr.
That's
Abraham
how he knows you.
came to know us. Right. Exactly.
Good.
Very good.
Alderman Wilson.
And as he mentioned, they were kind enough to try it out by opening one up across the street from my office. So I think everybody's going to enjoy the new restaurant. So welcome to Evanston.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Wilson.
We're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much for coming. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll be on for introduction. Next item is P2. It's Ordinance 4013, amending the zoning ordinance to allow the expansion of legal nonconforming 1 to 4 family residential uses by major variation. Following a recommendation of the Planning and Development Committee, the City staff recommends the adoption of proposed Ordinance 4013 to amend the zoning ordinance to allow properties with 1 to 4 family legal nonconforming residential uses to apply for zoning relief through the major variation process to increase the structure's bulk, and that's for introduction.
Second.
Okay. Dennis, did you want to?
Thank you, Alderman Fiss. Dennis Moreno, Manager of Planning and Zoning. As was just stated by Chairman Fisk, the ordinance as revised does reflect the committee's discussion and recommendations from the last meeting. These cases will be processed as major variations, which includes the 500-foot notice, as well as obviously a formal public hearing before the Zoning Board of Appeals. So with that being added, staff would also recommend approval.
Thank you. We have two people who are signed up to speak tonight. Timothy and Susan Shelley, it looks like. And Shell, okay. And then, oh, you're on P3? Okay. All right, then one person signed up to speak. It's Jeff Smith. Jeff, are you here? Oh, okay. Okay, is there any discussion on part of the committee?
I think we did good work on it.
Good. Okay. Then, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now we're moving on to P3 and P4. We have a number of people signed up to speak. I'll call your names, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. First one is Timothy and Susan Shell, and then Howard Handler.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tim Shell, and I live at 1246 Hinman. And last year we signed up with Airbnb. Oh, and this is my wife, Susan. And Airbnb it's kind of a low-key operation that has allowed us to be somewhat informal and relaxed about the whole thing. And I'm very impressed by the professionalism that Airbnb shows, and they've made every effort to make our visitors' experience work for us and for them as well. And there's a reason why their market value is estimated to be north of $2 billion, I think. They're part of the world's shared economy. And the guests that we've had since last year have been from all over the place, all over the world, really. India, South America, Europe, Asia. And they typically eat at our local restaurants, or they shop at Jewel, Whole Foods, don't have a car, and often rent bikes. And in some cases have been traveling all over the Chicago area on their bikes. Very impressive. And it's been a positive experience for me, and I was somewhat skeptical at the beginning. But like I said, it's been very positive and been a very good experience. And I think there are probably two major issues that this whole thing uncovers, and one is neighborhood safety and values. Unlike a hotel, we have a very much vested interest in who's in our home, sharing our home, and that we're living with, and for both safety and comfort. And I would say any laws, ordinances that need to be complied with should be. Disorderly conduct, excess noise, and so forth should not be allowed. During these times, everyone needs to be smart. We are not a gated community. People we don't know are free to walk around. And like I said, we need to be smart. Everybody with children needs to be smart. I think our visitors enrich the community. They certainly have enriched our experience. In terms of a city license, I think it probably does make sense to have some sort of license. I feel very comfortable with the vetting process that both Airbnb provides and that we also do for ourselves through communication with the people before they show up, through Facebook, through email, through phone conversations. And I think some rules probably are necessary here, but let's not overdo it. Thank you.
And I would just like to add that I have found this to be a very, very great company to work with. They are very committed to quality, and there are some, if you investigate the ownership of the stock, I think it would impress everyone here that, you know, these are not people that are looking to have another Craigslist. This couldn't be more different than Craigslist, which is a free enterprise. This Airbnb offers homeowners $1 million guarantee for your guest. So if your guest were to be hurt, say they fell down the stairs, they're not going to be able to sue your insurance, your homeowner's insurance, but they'll go after the Airbnb home insurance program. So that's how it works. And it's a wonderful organization. And we have had fabulous people, fabulous, and that I'm very proud to be able. And also, I have to say, it's made me look at Evanston now through new eyes, because everyone has loved Evanston so much, and I'm seeing it through new eyes, and that's been really refreshing for me to just see it as crisp and clean and new again as when I first saw it. So, thank you very much, everyone.
Hello, Howard Handler with the North Shore Barrington Association of Realtors. Again, we come before you on this ordinance and express our empathy with Evanston residents who oppose quasi-hotel operations in their neighborhood. However, again, both ordinances that you have before you fail to distinguish between properties that are regularly rented on a short-term basis, which are the properties of concern, and those properties that are rented once or very infrequently, which have seemingly not been the properties of concern. With 0313, which is the, or 35013, which is the ordinance before you to regulate and license the properties, ironically, it creates an environment where those that are operating quasi-hotels will be able to operate, while average Evanstonians will be effectively prohibited from renting their property even one time for less than 30 days. 35013 will likely have the effect of creating a system where the compliance burden for a bona fide vacation rental will be feasible to meet, but unfeasible for an Evanston property owner that one time or very infrequently needs to rent out their property for less than 30 days. In other words, the less one rents their property, the burden increases. We'd also like to just briefly mention the exemptions provided in 35013, and actually it's in the 1013, which is the prohibition ordinance. We definitely appreciate the attempt to incorporate exemptions, and a couple of them are very important exemptions, but we also found a lot of them arbitrary and capricious. So, for instance, a professor of higher education on sabbatical renting their property for less than 30 days would be allowed, but a rabbi or a priest who's on sabbatical would not be allowed. And, you know, what happens if it's an adjunct professor versus a regular professor? Another just, you know, quick point is that someone that has a 3-unit and they live in the property and live in one of the units, they could regularly rent out their property week after week after week after week. But if you live in a 4-unit property and rent out 1 unit one time in a decade, that would be prohibited without a license. So again, we're asking the city to better define its intent, and really, if there is a desire to ultimately regulate these quasi hotels, to really zero in on those hotels, so others that need to rent out on a very infrequent basis would not be overly burdened by this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Olufemi Davis and Kim Novi. Did I pronounce that correctly, I hope?
It's fine, Femi. Olufemi Davis. I live at 1525 Dobson Street. Now, the reason I decided to come and speak was to give my own perspective on it, because I have a feeling that it was probably initiated by me. People are renting their homes for various reasons, for financial concerns. Some for investment, some as a means, in my case, to keep my house. I have tried for over the past 4 months to get a renter, and I have been unsuccessful. The amount they're trying to offer is like a third of what my mortgage actually is. So it's a means of me keeping my home, which I love. It's not about making a huge profit. It isn't. And in particular, in my case, because I was singled out, the moment my address is Googled, you really don't want to stay at my house, because the whole thing with the Evanston city pops up. I am barely breaking even and meeting my mortgage. There's a concern about the guests, the quality of the guests. The caliber of guests that I have had has been fantastic. I've had teachers, I've had Girl Scouts, children with their leaders, I have had a plastic surgeon, I have directors of companies. The impression that was portrayed at my hearing was that the guests that I have are like riffraff, and they're not. They have been high-caliber people who have left my house in an impeccable state. I also use vacation rentals and Airbnb, who also screen them, and I also screen the guests. If an application is made, I go online. It's amazing what you can Google from somebody's name. You can find out where they work. You can find out a lot of information for free. So I also screen them before I agree to have them stay at my home. Some come for weddings. Some come for graduations from Loyola University, from Northwestern University, and they prefer to be in a home environment. I also use this when I go. We've been to Michigan, we've been to Tennessee. I choose to go in a vacation rental because I'm able to cook my own food, the kids are able to play. It's like a home away from home situation as opposed to going into a hotel. And also, if you say, therefore, if you're going to a state for a wedding, I have a group coming for a reunion. And rather than renting 5 hotel rooms, which nowadays people are financially constrained, you can't afford it. It makes economic sense. Rent a home. You all stay there, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, and maybe 2 kids running around, and they feel safe and secure. They go down to Joel's, they get their food. Before they're leaving, I give them train schedules, I give them the bus schedules, things to do in Evanston, and it works.
Can you just finish up fairly quickly?
Yeah, so, and also if you're instituting a rule, in my case, I feel like I was singled out and almost victimized. I felt like that. If a rule is going to apply to the professor, it has to apply to the nurse, it has to apply to the teacher, it has to apply to the Girl Scouts. Anybody who's going to come should be entitled to come. You don't need to have a PhD or be a professor at the top university to be able to rent a house for a week. And if there's a license, which I support, and if somebody's doing something illegal, the neighbors call the cops, and if you have complaints from that particular home, you pull their license. But I think if you say you're going to ban it, they could have banned cars when cars first came on because the cars were endangering the horse and carriages. They could have banned cell phones. They could ban the computer. They could ban the internet. Okay. You can't forbid it. You have to regulate it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kim Novy. And then Maureen O'Donnell.
Good evening. Almost 6-7 months ago, we came to the city of Evanston with a very, very simple request. We asked the city through this panel, through our alderperson, Ms. Grover, we contacted the city law department, and we asked for one simple request. Enforce the existing laws and prohibit people from renting out rooms of their home that are unlicensed. And here we sit. And in response, what you've given us are 2 proposals which are faulty and deficient in a number of ways, but they sanction the very act we've asked you to forbid. And it just seems like, I'm not sure what we're doing here. It's really insulting, I have to say. We've all spent a lot of time coming before you. We've been refused meetings with our alderperson. We've been refused meetings with the law department. And if you don't enact either, and I hope you don't enact either one of these, but you're going to have to do something. And what we're asking you again is enforce the city laws that prohibit this conduct. And in case we haven't been clear, those laws are, and I pardon this from sounding like a law school lecture, there's 3 statutes. The first statute that prohibits all of this is the lodging statute. It's Title 5, Chapter 2, lodging establishment. You cannot run a lodging establishment in R1. You cannot do it. You can't. You particularly can't do it without a licensing. Without a license. If you look at how the city code defines a lodging establishment, it's somebody who's renting out a home, a building for shelter. And that's what the people at 2515 Ashland are doing, and that's what a whole host of other people are doing in the city of Evanston. The second statute that is being violated is Title 8, Chapter 19, the bed and breakfast establishment. You've heard people today, and it's evident from testimony that you've heard before you, from advertisements on the internet, these people are serving breakfasts. You cannot do that unless you're licensed, period. The third statute that is being violated is Title 6, Chapter 5. It's the home occupations ordinance. And that ordinance prohibits any of us in R1 from running a home business running a business out of our homes between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. Now, we have asked, and not rhetorically, mind you, why the city will not enforce any of these 3 ordinances. I don't know, why. I know that a lot of people are not calling their homes bed and breakfast. They may not be calling themselves a lodging or a rooming house. But if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And these people are running bed and breakfast and lodging establishments, and we have never been given a reason as to why the city won't enforce those 2 statutes.
Ms. Novi, your 3 minutes are up.
Can I please explain the home occupations thing? Because this is the law department says that the home occupation statute does not apply, and it does. The law department says that the reason why they believe home occupation statute doesn't apply is because dwellings are exempted, and they are right. So you go to the statute that defines Chapter 18, and how do they define a dwelling? The city code defines a dwelling as a residential structure. And it also tells us what a dwelling is not, and that is a lodging, a rooming house, a motel, and a hotel. We are imploring you to enforce under any of these 3 ordinances until you decide what kind of a legislative scheme you'd like to adopt.
Thank you, Ms. Novi. Maureen O'Donnell.
Hello, my name is Maureen O'Donnell, and thank you for this opportunity to address our lawmakers. I live next door to 2515 Ashland, which is advertised on Craigslist and Airbnb.com to rent rooms for as little as $15 a night. Many of the Ashland neighbors have lost count of the people entering the home with pillows and luggage. On the weekend of the Cornhuskers game, another neighbor said she counted 12 renters going in and out. The language in their advertisement has assured renters there will be plenty of coolers at the home for whatever they would like to drink. The only rule seemed to be a request not to engage in, and I quote, hair-pulling fights. The owner of 2515 Ashland personally told me she has told her renters not to talk to neighbors, adding to the furtive appearance of this activity. Alderman Rainey, when we talked here about regulating this kind of activity, you likened it to a one-night stand. All of the aldermen on this committee expressed regret about what was happening on Ashland and the need to address it. At the March 2nd workshop, when one speaker said he does short-term rentals out of his building, Alderman Nguyen noted that this was apples and oranges because his ward is zoned for R5, completely different commercial activity than R1. Imagine my surprise when I read this new proposal to exempt single-family homes and 2 and 3 flats throughout Evanston from oversight regarding homeowners renting out rooms in their home by the night. We, the Ashland neighbors, have been doing everything possible to call your attention to this issue. Your solution is apparently to put the problem into law. By exempting single-family homes in 2 and 3 flats, you're explicitly protecting the places that are the source of the problem. For 7 months, we, the residents of the R1 zone, a non-commercial district, have been asking for your help. Yet our Corporation Council has written opinions stating overnight rentals are not a commercial activity, despite the fact that people tell you they are getting money for this. I understand the impact of our economic dip just as well as anyone, but it seems our government's inaction has encouraged people to make up the laws as they go along, turning Evanston into a city whose motto should be, because I feel like it, and you can't stop me. In fact, one of the neighbors said if hotels don't like these rentals, one of the neighbors engaging in this said, if hotels don't like these rentals, they should, and I quote, step up their game. Another neighbor on Ashland has expressed interest in starting overnight rentals. We only have 5 homes on our block. That would mean 40% of the buildings on the block will be advertising on Craigslist to come on down for the night. By bringing this illegal commercial activity to your attention, some of these renters have tried to defend their activity by implying that we, the Ashland Street neighbors, are xenophobic. We don't send our children to ETHS and Haven and Kingsley because we have a fear of strangers. We don't volunteer our time with Connections for the Homeless and our school and our churches and our school boards because we want to live in a gated community. But I will tell you this, I would never have bought my home if I knew that Evanston was going to give the green light to greed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next 2 speakers are Mark Rosati and David Berg.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Mark Rosati, 2509 Ashland. This is, by my count, at least the 6th hearing I've been at on this issue. And please keep in mind, as Kim said, all our organization ever asked for was for the city to write a simple citation for violation of existing zoning laws involving R1 districts. I'm not an attorney, as I've said before, but if I'm reading these ordinances correctly, people who have single-family homes or 2 or 3 flats would be exempt from either the ban or the licensing scheme and could rent to transients, whatever you want to call them. These ordinances would essentially take every objection that my neighbors and I have raised over the past 10 months and decide that the objectionable conduct, rather than being something that should be prohibited, should be enshrined into law. I am completely baffled. Tonight is the first time we've heard people who are operating these establishments come. And again, I still have yet to hear anybody talk about how this is good public policy as opposed to serving personal financial interests. And again, with all due respect, I don't quite have a lot of confidence in Facebook and Google as security checks, particularly with 2 establishments that could be operating on our block across the street from an elementary school. We have certainly not heard one homeowner who lives next door to one of these establishments say they think it's been a wonderful addition to the fabric of the community. You've heard many lawyers, including a former justice of the Illinois Appellate Court, stand here and say what Ms. Novi said earlier, that the existing laws prohibit this activity. We've asked the city to enforce it, and they have not. Instead, we have these proposed ordinances, which seem to turn everything on its head. Dealing with allowing this activity for units that are 4 or 6 or whatever residences doesn't solve the problem. The problem are that in the R1 zoned districts, it is the single family and the 2 and the 3 flats that are proliferating. When you're in an R1 district, you expect that you are in a residential area, you know your neighbors, you raise your family, you put down roots, and you support the community with high property taxes. I am baffled again by what I read in the packet from the law department last week that this is not a commercial activity. I fail to understand how advertising something and taking money for it is not defined as a commercial activity. If either of these passes as written, the concept of R1 zoning becomes meaningless. I do not understand why the city would willfully erode its property values and tax base. And as someone who bought a home in an R1 district in good faith, I would certainly feel the victim of a bait and switch.
David Berg.
Evening, Alderman Fisk, committee. David Berg, 2510 Jackson Avenue, right around the corner from where this apparently started. Evanston, I've been here 37 years. Love this community. Came from Decatur, Illinois. All right, I wasn't going to talk about this, but I guess I'll bring it up. I live right down the street from Governor Oglesby's mansion. Now, if you know who Governor Oglesby is, I know what age you are. But it's a beautiful mansion. And in Decatur, if you've ever been to Decatur now, you see what it's like. It's like the inner cities of Bloomington, Normal, Rockford. People started renting out their houses, and they started renting out the upstairs of their houses. And some of these houses in Decatur were mansions. The one right next to Governor Oglesby, it was bigger than the Governor Oglesby, and all of a sudden they started renting it out as rooming houses. They finally had to pass laws in Decatur that says you cannot rent out homes in single-family home communities because it was just taking the neighborhoods down. Now, I'm sure there's great landlords in Evanston. I've been a part of that. I've lived with landlords. There are people probably are great landlords for if you had an Air bed and breakfast. It's not singling anybody out, but the fact is this is an R1 issue. That's what we made it. That's what I think it is. And we live in an R1 district. The Ashland Street area where it is, the R1 is what, single-family dwellings and an area where you could preserve the physical character of the community, right where you live. You could have these rental units and everything's fine, and you have great landlords that are managing that. But how do you stop the ones that aren't good? And I guess that's my point. I had a lot of things here to say, but a lot of people have said them already, so I'm not going to rehash that. But if I'm trying to see how you would manage if you did have this license is in place. If you have somebody who doesn't appreciate, you bring neighbors in that don't appreciate the fabric of the neighborhood as far as noise, about parking. Air bed and breakfast might be great. I don't know them. I've seen their website. But not everybody's going to use Air bed and breakfast. And even if they do, what's going to stop somebody from having a party right next door to you? Some of these homes are 5 feet from each other, 11 feet from each other. It's right there. And I just don't think it's right for the community. The ordinance in favor of the vacation rentals as proposed is completely unnecessary because you already have the other ordinances in place, as Kim mentioned. The ordinance in favor of the vacation rentals does not resolve or even address the issue that began on Ashland Avenue. It excludes homes greater than 1,000 square feet and 2 roomers and rooming houses. So I'm not sure why we're here either. If the ordinance is passed, the vacation ordinance, there's no way that I can see that you can manage that. Because I don't know if you're going to have people going out there, knocking on the door, seeing if people are staying just for a night. What it's going to end up being is we're going to be managing it as neighbors. And if you manage it as neighbors, then that means we have to call a complaint in. I don't want to do that. I don't think anybody in here wants to do that. But that's actually what happens if it's not being managed, if the parking's not being managed, if you have a football game and you've rented out the whole house, if you're not managing that.
Mr. Berg, your time is up.
Okay, one more thing. The last thing is ordinance should not be made or changed just because the economy has gone south or because people need money. I need money. I need money to pay our taxes just like everybody here. But I don't think we should be making ordinances to make that happen. So, again, at the end, you have current ordinances in place. I'd like to see you please enforce them. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Howard Gartzman? Okay, sorry about that. And then Greg and Jenny Richards.
Hello, Howard Gartzman and Sue Gartzman at 2401 Jackson. We're Airbnb. We have guests through Airbnb. We've been doing it since 2008. And we just wanted to give a taste of, we have a 12-year-old son at home. He's 12 now. So there is a screening process with Airbnb where Sue has dialogue, and if she's uncomfortable, they're not coming to our house. an example of why people come to Evanston and spend their money at the restaurants and shopping in Evanston are parents of students at Northwestern, college professors, MBA candidates coming in that have to come in for a few days, DePaul community professors. We've had people from Korea, Australia, all over Europe, India, Colombia. We've stayed at Airbnbs in Portland, New York, Austin, San Francisco. We found that other people that have come to our house are executives from Life Fitness. So you get a variety of people. We kind of find it enriching for our son, enriching for us. Certainly everyone that's come has loved that community of Evanston and probably has spread the idea of coming to Evanston around the world. I don't think it's a bad advertisement for Evanston. That's really all I wanted to say. Did you want to add anything?
I didn't really prepare anything, but, just to kind of reiterate what people have been saying, we've never felt threatened in any way. The people that we've had have been incredibly polite, incredibly respectful. They're not coming here to try to cause trouble. They're coming here to enrich their own lives and spend money in the community. I think this is something that's changing all over the world. It's a sharing economy. Every community is having to deal with this. San Francisco's having to deal with it. Everywhere that Airbnb is, I'm sure that they're grappling with the same thing. So I would just encourage you to look at what other communities are doing and not overreact to it.
Thank you very much.
Judy, may
Yes.
I ask a question?
Sure.
To move your thing so you can see our lights.
Yeah.
Could I ask you a question? When you have guests, do you stay in the home or do you leave the home?
We're in the home.
You're in the home. You don't ever vacate for the guests?
No.
I work out of the home, so I'm in the home. And people want to chat with me. I mean, this goes, they'll sit there and talk to me for hours, and I have to say, I'm sorry, I have to go back to work now. So, these aren't people who are wanting to have a party when I go out to work. It's just not like that.
Like we said at the workshop that we had, it's not the good situations that we're talking about. We wouldn't even be here if there hadn't been complaints, really bizarre behavior.
Yeah,
so
we don't know anything about the situation on Ashland. We don't know how that person is doing it. In fact, this is the first time we've met anybody else who even has an Airbnb place in Evanston, and we would never want to upset our neighbors in any way and feel that is wrong. And I'm really sorry for their situation.
Thank you.
Okay. Greg and Jenny Richards.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Greg Richards. I live at 2529 Ashland Avenue. My first comment this evening is that in response to the two draft ordinances that are presented this evening are that some of the exceptions, which has been said before, written into the ordinances really do not make sense to me. I don't know why we would treat university professors as a privileged class and allow them to run a hotel-like operation out of their home when everyone else either is not allowed to do it at all or has to have a license to do it. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem fair and equitable. And similarly, I don't understand why we would exempt 2 and 3 flat owners from the regulation of transient rentals. I think that night and weekend rentals are every bit as detrimental to a neighborhood when they happen in a 2-flat as when they happen from a single-family home. And so whatever final form the ordinance takes, I think those 2 exceptions certainly should be struck. As my neighbor Mark Rosati said, I think this is the 6th committee meeting on the topic of vacation rentals. Numerous people have spoken at previous meetings about how night and weekend rentals are not in keeping with the character of residential neighborhoods. My neighbors and I circulated a petition that gathered more than 125 signatures from Evanstonians who support restricting this activity from residential areas such as R1 zones. And this is not alarmism or fear-mongering, as some have suggested. People like my wife and I, who bought a home in a residential area, are entitled to receive the benefit of our bargain. We should not have to worry that our next-door neighbor might someday decide to open a quasi-hotel in their home, negatively affecting both our quality of life and potentially the value of our own property. We've also heard comments from individuals who believe that allowing vacation rentals can bring economic benefits to Evanston, can help property owners financially, and need not be detrimental to a neighborhood. But I think it's inconsistent to allow vacation rentals in residential zones when other not dissimilar uses such as rooming houses, apartment hotels, and bed and breakfasts are either not allowed at all or are only allowed as special uses in these zones. Thus far, this committee has considered only two ways to deal with the issue of transient rentals. Either A, prohibiting such rentals everywhere in Evanston, or B, allowing such rentals everywhere in Evanston subject to a licensing requirement. And I think if you're groping for some kind of third way, a middle ground between those two alternatives, then I suggest that you follow the precedent of the zoning for other similar uses such as rooming houses, which could mean potentially disallowing vacation rentals or permitting them only as special uses in R1 through R6, and possibly establishing it as a permitted use in more commercial zones. I think this would probably be a more fruitful path to follow than either of the two draft ordinances that are being presented here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jenny?
Hi. I'm the homeowner of a single family in an R1 district and the mom of 3 boys. And it was my expectation when I bought my home 6 years ago that it would remain a residential single family home and not be a place where there would be commercial activity in the homes and nightly room rentals. Both of the two proposed ordinances would make it legal for 2 or 3 flats to rent out homes on a nightly basis to conduct commercial activity in an R1 district. And whatever they're called, vacation rentals operate as hotels. As the proposed ordinance states, they must register guests, they must change bed linens and towels at least once a week. This kind of commercial activity in R1 districts will change the character of the neighborhoods and it will bring down property values. I think it's critical that the committee go back to the existing ordinances and, as Kim had said, try to enforce those. And if you're not willing to do that, to look at them individually, not to do one broad-based ordinance for all of the different districts. R1 is very different than some of the permitted special use, the more mixed-use residential areas. In an effort to try to find out more about what other communities were doing, I talked to someone in the Wilmette Planning Department and I asked them how they enforce these type of laws or what they do in this type of situation, and they said that this is clearly not permitted, and when they are asked, when they find out about it, they take action on it. And I would just ask you to think about why families such as mine would continue to stay in Evanston if their properties are rented out in this way nearby. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last 2 speakers, Jeff Smith and then Scott Gross.
Thanks. Members of the committee, I too bought a property.
Could we have your address, please?
Jeff Smith, 2724 Harrison. I bought a single-family home in an R1 neighborhood, and I'm entitled to the benefit of my bargain. And part of what I bought was the right to live in my house, and part of what I bought is the right to rent out my property. I can leave for a year and rent out my property. I can leave for 6 months and rent out my property. Currently, Evanston has no limitation on the length of time you can rent out your property. Being able to rent out your property is part of what goes with having property. Not everything that you do that brings in money turns it into a commercial enterprise or a business. A garage sale is not a store. A church rummage sale is not Kmart. Selling your personal automobile does not turn you into a car dealer. Running a hobby is different than running a business. There's all sorts of things that fall short of being a business. In an attempt to try and draw a line somewhere, I submitted to the entire council as well as to the city attorney a draft ordinance that used the number of times you might do this as a trigger, and I suggest that would make more sense than taking 10, 20,000 properties in Evanston that currently have the right to rent out property and applying something to them where it's not a problem. Because what I'm seeing here is like the movie Rebel Without a Cause. It's regulation without a cause. although I am sympathetic to and I hear the concerns of the folks on Ashland, I'm looking at all of Evanston, and I would guess that from the testimony we've had from people that are already doing this, that have been doing this for years without causing a problem, without anybody even knowing about it, and from the number of ads that I've seen on Airbnb, Craigslist, VRBO, etc., there have to have been 1,000, 2,000 guests minimum that have come to Evanston, and I'm not aware of one single arrest. I'm not aware of one single citation. So fear-mongering may be a harsh word, but I'm hearing mainly the fear of what might happen rather than actual evidence of what has happened. So I agree with Ms. Novi that the proposed ordinances don't match up to the complaints on Ashland, which seem to be rentals of rooms, individual rooms. I would say that that's distinct from renting out access to your, essentially your whole home, whether you're in it or not. I'm an empty nester now. We might travel some. I get called away occasionally to go to Washington or Springfield or cities where I go for pleasure. Not that people don't go to Washington or Springfield for pleasure. And we could pay people to stay in our house as house sitters. We could invite somebody to come and stay in our house for free, but why not be Tom Sawyer? And you could have the exact same person, only they're paying you rather than you paying them.
Jeff, your 3 minutes are up.
The proposed ordinance, I just want to point out, has a major inconsistency. That it's opposite of what it seems to want to even accomplish, because you could have 6 35-day rentals, 6 groups of strangers coming onto Ashland Street or Harrison Street or whatever, and it would be exempt because they're 35 days. But one person who does this once every 2 years is subject to the entire regulatory gamut, has to have inspected, be up to code, which nobody in Evanston is up to code. So this is something, it's an activity that helps property owners to keep their homes above water. It helps people visit Evanston who'd otherwise be priced out, and it helps support the housing market by enabling the purchase of houses that might otherwise be empty.
Thank you, Jeff. Scott Gross.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Scott Gross. I live on Ashland Street, just a few houses down from the rooming house, Transient Hotel.
Could you give us your house number?
2507 Ashland. Thank you for the chance to speak to you. When I heard about this whole issue, I was very confused and puzzled about what exactly the problem is. I've been a board member on a number of village boards throughout the Chicago area, and it has been consistent across all of these villages I've been at that we do not allow these types of transient hotels, rooming arrangements in R1 residential districts. There's a reason for that, not only property values, but to protect the children in the neighborhood. I have children who live in my house. There are some wonderful children next door to us who go to grade school. As you know, there is a Catholic school across the street with hundreds of children who go there. The purpose is to protect people, and we don't know who's coming into the village. We don't know who's coming into the neighborhood. And while I certainly understand and respect those who make this arrangement and that nothing has happened yet, the reason these laws are in place is to protect from it happening ever. And that's the point. I hope that that is something that's recognized here. No doubt we, as a village, want the commercial establishments and the businesses to be effective and do well. But when it comes to an R1 residential district, we have to be much more careful and not allow it in that area. As Alderman Rainey rightly said, on Ashland Street, it is very different from the other bed and breakfasts or whatever you want to call them throughout Evanston. There, the owners do not live there. We do not know who is there. No one is checking to see who is there. No one is keeping an eye on who is there, except the people who live in that street and look at what's going on and try their best to make sure that if there's anything suspicious going on, we have an eye on it. We really hope that going forward you take that into consideration and keep the law as it is and enforce it in an R1 district so that we homeowners and we parents of children do not have to worry about situations like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes, yes. Oh. How about a minute?
Half a page.
Okay.
I'll be fast.
And I need your name and address.
Jody Lee Mazzaro, 1310 Rosalie Street. I'm a longtime Evanston resident on a quiet residential one-block street. I am extremely dissatisfied with the proposed ordinance as I understand it. I am not a lawyer, but if I'm understanding this proposed ordinance correctly, someone could have their primary residence in the city, buy the house right next door to mine as an investment, list it on the internet for nightly rentals, either one room, multiple rooms, or the whole house, and as long as the owner is on the premises while the customers are staying there, then that would be legal. And they can do that without a license and therefore with virtually no oversight. That sounds to me strangely similar to what I'm hearing about on Ashland, and that is not okay. I believe this would negatively impact the character of my street, not to mention the value of my property. Most importantly, there's a huge difference between someone renting out a room in their home to make ends meet or renting the coach house in their backyard and the scenario that's taking place at one home on Ashland, and now I've heard that the owner of the house next door is considering doing the same thing. It seems to me that we are not stopping to think how we would feel if the house next door to us was actually functioning as a business, as someone's investment, and doing so without a license and without oversight. In my opinion, this ordinance does not address the whole reason this issue came up in the first place. It's a reasonable assumption that when I bought my house in Evanston 23 years ago, there would not be a business next door. I don't understand why the drafters of this ordinance think it's okay to now allow this type of business in residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is the end of citizen comment. So we'll open it up to discussion. Alderman Rainey.
I'm going to say it one last time. I will not support anything, I don't care how serious the problem is, that excludes all the other our districts. The children in our in our 5 districts are as precious as the children in your district. And I find it, and I support some kind of regulation for vacation rentals, but I find it just so offensive listening to the exclusive and elitist attitude about our one districts. I rented an apartment for many, many years at 746 Hinman in the 3rd Ward, which I loved. I had an alderman on the Evanston City Council tell me one time, someday you will buy a house and become a regular citizen of this community. I have never forgotten that, and I showed him that I definitely became a regular citizen. Not that I wasn't one before, but there is this perception in the city of Evanston that is unlike other communities, and that is there are 2 classes of people. There are homeowners, and then there are tenants. And that is just wrong. And people who are renting these vacation rentals, they're not bad people. There are some incidents that have happened that have to be stopped. And I want to help regulate in any way I can. But I will tell you right now, it is not going to be if I have anything to do with this, and I know I'm only 1 vote, but I'm hoping to be influential, that there will not be any discrimination between or among various zoning districts. Absolutely none. One of the best stories that we've heard about quality vacation rental was from the man who lives over on Harrison or wherever, who's been doing it for years and lives in his building and everything's fine. So I don't see any need to be exclusive or elitist about this ordinance. But I certainly object also to this professor exemption. I think that's crazy. So,
okay.
And I hope the committee will agree with me on not singling out one class of people against another. After all, we all moved here for the diversity.
Okay. Alderman Nguyen, did you want to?
Well, Alderman Rainey, I don't think that I can perhaps understand your viewing the comments that way, but I didn't think that they came across that way at all. And I'd like to just make a point that it wasn't this third ward alderman. No,
it was the ninth ward. It was a ninth ward alderman.
Oh, it was a ninth? Okay.
Yes, it was Alderman Bora.
Okay.
To be specific.
All right. So I do think we have not solved this problem at all. And there are terrible inconsistencies in both these ordinances. I agree with the neighbors. I don't understand why the three ordinances that we already have on the books, as were cited by Ms. Novi, are not each individually capable of dealing with the problem on Ashland. And so I'm still puzzled by that and why that has not occurred, because I think that would certainly have solved problems. We're just bollocksing this up more and more. Quite frankly, what I'm hearing is that we have unlicensed B&Bs operating right now in Evanston, and I think they need to get licensed. Pardon? Right. You talk to the law department. Yeah. So we have a licensing process. So I think that we really do need to hold this, because this isn't going to get worked on tonight. And there are all of the flaws that were described. Why is a professor any different from any other professional or anybody else who takes a sabbatical, whether you're a grocery store clerk or a homeless person who takes a sabbatical? I mean, that's a terrible comment, but we're not getting anywhere on this. And I still don't. I think that Ms. Novi and the neighbors have very legitimate questions, and I don't understand why they have not been allowed to have a meeting with the law department. If that is the case, I have notes about that. I'd like to get an answer to that question. Obviously, when things are run perfectly, there aren't problems, but there is a problem here on Ashland, and we need to figure that out, because Ashland won't be the only problem that we have. I think it's wonderful that we have people who have figured out how to run a B&B without having it be licensed and have not having us notice it. But Craigslist is very different from Airbnb. So those are my questions, and I think we need to hold it.
Does everyone on the committee agree? Alderman Holmes.
Well, yes, I do agree that we ought to hold it. I was just going to comment and really say to the people, I know that it's been a long time, and I can go back to the very first meeting that you have to keep coming back and back. But from the beginning, I think we ought to do this, and we have to do it right. And I know we tried to have the one meeting, and we did get input, but I think that we have to have a meeting with this group, open, of course, for everyone, but we need to really sit down and work this out. And so I am agreeing that we should hold it, because I cannot support the ordinances as they are presented tonight.
Yes, Alderman Rainey.
I think we should hold it also, but I think we have to have a plan.
Yeah, we do. And
what's the plan?
The work is ours. We have to do it. I mean, we've got to make the decisions, and we've got to work it through. And I understand the staff is trying to help us, but I don't know if we're even giving clear enough directions in terms of what for them to bring back, because I'm not sure that we're clear on it in terms of where we are.
Well, I think the reason the professor thing was incorporated is because everybody that spoke said, and we said we would incorporate suggestions, and everybody said, well, we don't want to restrict professors who, live in fancy single-family homes, who want to rent out their home while they're on sabbatical. I mean, so that's why it got in there. I can understand why it's in there, but it is definitely exclusionary.
And that's what I mean, Ann, is I think that we said that, and we had one thought in mind, and until we flush that kind of stuff out, it's not fair to the staff to say, go do this, and we have not, it's not clear. I just don't think that we're given clear information.
Okay. Alderman Wilson, then Alderman Nguyen.
Thank you. And I think We have an existing bed and breakfast ordinance, so this was intended to kind of fill in the gaps. Now, we have an enforcement question. There are reasons why someone wouldn't let us enforce the other three ordinances, and I wasn't there. I don't know why they weren't, why we had difficulty enforcing them, but we've identified a specific problem with regard to this particular neighborhood. We've identified other circumstances where people have come up with an entrepreneurial idea, and it sounds like they want to be compliant with whatever appropriate regulations that we come up with. So we have to come up with something that it's basically just a continuation of the existing bed and breakfast ordinance. It's not the same thing as the one on Church Street. It's something different, but these don't do it. What we have is sort of a cobbled together license idea or a ban with some. They're not random, but somewhat carefully selected exceptions. But they're not fair exceptions. It's not a fair application. So it does require a lot of work. But I think what I'd like to see is something that starts with the problem. The problem is an inability to enforce something and goes backwards by dovetailing into the existing bed and breakfast ordinance, because these aren't, a 6-unit house where you're, living there and serving breakfast. But it is something, and something that needs to be supervised in some way so that we can keep track of what's going on.
Okay, Alderman Nguyen, then Alderman Rainey, then Alderman Holmes.
Well, I'm following up on some of what Alderman Wilson said. I do think that it may not be, so if it's not a bed and breakfast, so breakfast isn't being served, then it's a rooming house. So, and we have a rooming house ordinance. So why is that not being enforced?
Well, that's my suggestion. We could bring both ordinances, both definitions to you at the next meeting. You want to talk about that?
I want to know why, an answer to Ms. Novi's questions, because I read Judge Shader's opinion, but I don't understand why, when someone announces to us here that they're running a B&B and they don't have a license, why is there no ability to enforce against that? When someone says, I'm not serving breakfast, or it's just a room, that's a rooming house. We have ordinances about rooming houses and what zones they're permitted in and what you have to do to run a rooming house. And we do have home occupation ordinances, and that are described. And you can't have a home occupation between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. Those things all exist right now, and any one of those could address the Ashland problem, is my understanding. So I want an explanation why each and every one of those, individually or collectively, can't address this problem, because I don't think my reading of Judge Shader's opinion doesn't indicate that we are prohibited from approaching that. I do think people buy your home in a particular district because of what you're able to do with it. The gentleman we had who lived on Harrison, who had the property, it was in an R5 zone, he bought it because it had rental ability. Fine. People who buy in an R1 buy it because only their nuclear family is going to live in it, a single family, and their neighbor will not be able to run a hotel next to them. We are definitely altering the fabric of our zoning ordinance, or letting it be altered beyond our control. And I think we have to get ahead of this somehow. But I agree with the neighbors who say, without knowing that Sue and Tim Schell are wonderful people, if you were coming to the neighborhood and you had a choice between one house next to an Airbnb or a Craigslist and another house 3 blocks away that had 2 single families living on either side of you, what happens? And we have examples of what Wilmette does. Why don't we look at what Wilmette does? I think Evanston is wonderful. It's an attractive community. We want to continue to be lively and attractive and stay ahead of the curve on certain things, but I do think we want to be able to hold on to the values that the property values that we have.
Well,
and Alderman
I'm
Holmes.
wondering, when you think about it, do we want to, could I finish talking, please? Do we want to outlaw the good ones and the bad ones? And I'm talking about vacation rentals. I'm not talking about bed and breakfasts. They need to be licensed. We have, but see, this is another problem. We can license vacation rentals. People who want to fly under the radar, they're not going to license them, and then we'll find out about it later. But do we want to control the good ones as well as the bad ones? I'm thinking about the issue we had 2 weeks ago or last week about BYOB licenses. And, it turned out that we really didn't need it after all. And I'm just wondering, is there, like Don said and like Melissa said, why can't we just bring down the hammer on the bad ones? I mean, people who are behaving badly need to be sanctioned, and that's what we have. And I don't see that is discriminating against the good ones. And the good ones are those who you don't even know they're renting out their unit. I just don't see it. I think everybody who's going to do it needs to register, and if you want to call it licensing, fine. But this one on whatever street that is, Ashland, why haven't our police been there? Why hasn't the health department been there? Why hasn't property standards been there? I don't understand. Probably the fire department should be there.
You're waiting for something to happen for that?
Pardon me?
You're trying to jump ahead so it doesn't happen.
No, I'm saying, why don't we get the fire department, the police department, the health department? Well, I'm not going to fight with the audience. So
No.
it's ridiculous.
Alderman Holmes, and then the city manager is up at the podium.
No, Alderman Rain was saying good or bad. I'm not going to say good or bad, but what I've noticed, I know what you mean. The theme seems to be those homes that are rented, vacation rentals, where the owners are in the home versus where you have a home that's just unattended by the owner. And that seems to be what's happening on Ashland. And I don't care. I know it's an R1 district, but it could be in an R3, and if it was unattended, it would have the same issue. And that, I think, is something else that we have not addressed in terms of that. We talked a little bit about that with the bread and breakfast, and of course we did that. But we have to figure that out, because I think it's a lot of difference between, we talked to, I can't remember his name, but the man on Harrison, he lives on the second floor. And he rents out. So he's had a great experience. And I think people that live in their homes will have a great experience, because you're there to monitor and to see what's going on. And maybe other people won't have as good of an experience.
Mr. City Manager.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, your staff has been trying to accommodate what you would like to do. I appreciate the discussion this evening. I think Alderman Holmes' final point really is the critical one in my mind as we move forward. If the council is comfortable with separating the issue between having an owner or an operator there, then we have the bed and breakfast and the rooming house ordinance, and the law department can review those language, and if we feel we need to come back with amendments to that to fit that, I think we can do it. I think the real question then is, what do you do with facilities that are not occupied by an owner or an operator that aren't that? And I think that's where the push and shove is. We did go to federal court, and I think the law department is trying to protect the city's interests in the best way it can, and came forward asking the council to address the issue with a modified ordinance. If the council wishes to outlaw them, we can go back to existing law and try to come forward with amendments which we think will meet the federal standards. But I think the issue is occupied versus unoccupied. And if you could give additional direction, we can come back with a draft ordinance or amendments to existing ordinances to accommodate that and bring this to a conclusion. Or if you just would like to talk further about it, we can schedule either as part of your regular meeting at the end of April, which will be the next time the committee would meet, regularly scheduled, or schedule a special meeting. My sense is, let me go take a step further. My sense is that the owner-occupied issue is less important, or less critical, and if we were to look at our ordinances, we could perhaps come back with some amendments that would require appropriate enforcement in calling something either a boarding house or a bed and breakfast. Is that a correct assumption on my part or an incorrect assumption? Again, the law department is concerned based on the court hearing that the law as it currently stands, the statute as it currently stands, is insufficient. We could then bring back a revised statute that perhaps would be more sufficient.
Alderman Rainey?
So are you saying, City Manager, that because we're not calling it something, we can address the issues on Ashland?
And perhaps I don't know if the Corporation Council wishes to chime in or not, but my understanding in our discussions has been that existing law, based on the court's findings, the law department and the Corporation Council feels that the current language is not sufficient. So we could look at the existing language and come back to you with amendments to existing language.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Grant for our Corporation Council. As this issue has evolved, what we on staff in work in consultation with Director Griffin's staff is tried to come up with a regulatory scheme that would be as clear and comprehensive as possible. The issues relative to what happened in Alderman Rainey's ward were considered in federal court, but they were also considered by the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the Law Department and the Community and Economic Development Department did file local ordinance violations that were heard by the ZBA, and we expressly charged that as a lodging establishment. The Zoning Board of Appeals disagreed with that. So those ordinance violations never gained purchase because the Zoning Board of Appeals disagreed with our interpretation of the code. Then there was the intervening matter in federal court that gave further guidance to this issue. So in looking at this, we looked at other jurisdictions, and what other jurisdictions did is they used vacation rental as a term of art, and they clearly defined that as a term of art because it gave the enforcement scheme some color, some clarity, some depth. So we, as this process have evolved, have followed that pattern, and that pattern's been done in New York, Chicago, other jurisdictions. So it seemed like a very appropriate way to go forward. In terms of the issues that are raised relative to the definitions of bed and breakfast is a little bit different in that it specifically says that there's going to be a meal cooked on site under the definitions, a breakfast provided by the operator. So again, vacation rentals, as we've heard tonight and heard at other junctions in this dialogue, seem to have different ways of meal service. Some have meal service, some don't. So the B&B definition is a little troubling from an enforcement perspective. The home occupation, we've discussed that at length in some transmittal memos. So really the issue, as this committee, as this council has grappled with it and has given suggestions, direction to staff, it's continuing to evolve. I mean, the enforcement issue is going to be there. So if the will of the committee and the will of the council is that we give the enforcement mechanisms on the books in place another shot, we can certainly do that. But there could be possible downsides to that. And the Law Department and the Community Development Department have been very clear about that, both with this committee, this council, and everyone who has called up the Law Department, had meetings with the Law Department, and meetings with the aldermen in the Aldermanic Library last fall. So this is not something that we are unaware of as staff. This is a very difficult issue. This jurisdictional issue, this enforcement issue, is something that's very difficult to parse out and get a comprehensive, clear scheme in place for. So, essentially the takeaway from my comments here would be that the enforcement issue, however we decide to do it, if we decide to give lodging establishment another shot, if we give bed and breakfast a shot, if we charge it as home occupation, we can try that. But I think that there's going to be some serious interpretation issues that are going to be interposed in our path for purposes of enforcement. It's something that we can try. So that is why, up to this point, we have tried to do a carve-out consistent with every other zoning issue that has popped up as the zoning ordinance is developed organically. You use terms of art. You use those terms of art to then inform and flesh out the enforcement mechanisms. So that's what we tried here.
And as your city manager who has the law department responsible for your law department and your community and economic development department, we need to do better, and we need to give you a solution that will move forward. It may not be a perfect solution. I commend the Corporation Council in his efforts. I commend the community and economic development department, but we still don't have it. So again, I would go back to my query earlier that if we are able to go back, look at the existing rooming house, existing bed and breakfast language, tighten that up a little bit, that leaves the question of a home that is rented out without the owner or any kind of manager on premise, if that would be lawful or not lawful. And I think that's what we're grappling with.
Sure. Alderman Wilson.
In my mind, the problem isn't so much that people are renting spaces in buildings. It's not the fact that people are occupying spaces. I think that the problem primarily, and I understand that there are reservations about who's there and screening and things like that, but I think the fundamental problem is when someone is disruptive and creates a disruption in the neighborhood or the community or on the block. Why can't we address a disruption? Is that right? I think that's kind of at the core of what we're looking at here. And I'm being facetious when I say this, but why don't we have a rule that says if you rent a room out to somebody and they're noisy, you pay a $500 fine? That's the rule. It's real easy. It's one sentence. It's somewhat facetious, but that's what people are having a hard time understanding, is why can't we have a rule that addresses the disruptive behavior? We've got a lot of stuff here talking about the exceptions and everything, but regardless of who you are, if you're a professor on sabbatical and you let somebody come and stay in your house and that person comes and has wild parties every weekend, sure, we have rules about wild parties, but this doesn't address the core problem. It doesn't address the Nebraska fans coming in droves. It doesn't address any of the core problem, and that is the disruption. It's the disruption that's the problem. It's not the fact that people are coming and renting here. So I think that's really, as I've listened to this, I think that's maybe where some of the disconnect is that I think we're doing too much to try to talk about who comes and goes and where it happens. Everyone in the entire city, as Alderman Rainey said, is just as important as anybody else, and everyone deserves the same protections, and everybody deserves to live in a community that's free from disruption. So I think that's where we really need to dial into addressing that.
And Alderman Wilson, members of the committee, we're happy to come back with language. But I guess as I've been listening to these discussions, I'm hearing a broader disruption, and that is a disruption in the fabric of the community and the minds of some of the folks. And how you legislate that and how you regulate that, it would be very easy if people are being noisy, disruptive, disturbing the peace in the most generic way. Absolutely, that's very easy. But I think I'm hearing from some residents that the mere fact that the house is being rented out for people who are transients, regardless of their disturbing the peace or not disturbing the peace, that's the problem. And how does the city of Evanston then regulate that? We've heard, I think, from people who say that it adds to the color and life of the community, and others who say it is detrimental to their properties and their property value. That's where we are as your staff trying to help sort through this, because I don't think, with all due respect, that what I've heard is that it's because of noise or disorderly conduct, that it's the mere presence. And I think that's the public policy question before you. Is it appropriate or not appropriate in any R zone?
Yes, Alderman Nguyen.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Senior Manager, that's precisely what my concern is. I agree, terrible behavior, absolutely we should crack down on. It shouldn't be sanctioned. If you own your own home and you're being a nuisance to your neighbors, and they have every right to call the police and say, our neighbors are being a nuisance. No, to me, the fundamental issue is, why do we have a zoning ordinance? And we can all go to Houston and find out what it's like to live in a community that doesn't have good zoning. But we're the first community in Illinois to have a zoning ordinance, and it's why we actually have a very interesting community to live in right now, because we have commercial very near residential, but we still have the boundaries so that it doesn't bleed into each other in ways that then make it intolerable to continue to be a residential neighborhood. And someone, I think in the last meeting that we had, the workshop, said, you can't open a hamburger joint next door to my house in whatever zone I'm in, residential zone I'm in, because it's residential. So I think it's wonderful that we have all these people who are coming to our community and from all of these places and contributing to our economy, but I think that we still have this fundamental issue of, are we deciding to dissolve part of the zoning ordinance? And that's the fundamental issue here. I think we have to think about that pretty hard, because we do have people who are saying, this is diminishing the value of my property. And, you could have the best behaved people coming, and your neighbor could give you their resume before they arrive, but you're still running a commercial establishment next to a single-family home in whatever district, and it still is affecting their property value. And we have to have a discussion about that. But I think, meanwhile, the issue on Ashland is an acute problem that needs an acute resolution right now, or needs to be addressed. I don't even know what the status is of it right now. But that's why I think we're having a hard time with this. So I think that we should hold this till the next meeting.
I agree.
Get it back. And start
definitions. Well, let us at least bring back the definition of bed and breakfast boarding house to see where there's a gap, if any.
I would like at the next meeting to be told that we have had, our staff has had, maybe with the alderman, a sit down with the owner of the property on Ashland to determine exactly what is happening there, and to have perhaps a few other members of our staff there, for example, the health department, definitely people from community development, to find out if it's overcrowded, if there's sufficient toilet facilities, those kinds of things. Find out what's happening there and how it is that they go about doing what they're doing, because I'm getting really tired of talking about this if it's really based on a few serious problems like the one on Dobson and the one on Ashland. I don't want to, it seems to me that first we have to find out what's going on there. Let's find out exactly what's going on there and how they're conducting their business. And we might find out, just as the neighbors are saying, that there are serious violations of existing laws. And I don't think we know that right now. The neighbors might know it, but I don't think the authorities know it. We hear things, but I think it would be good to confirm. And so I would like a report back on exactly what the status of that property is. And if there's another one, I don't know if there's only one that they're talking about or more than one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everyone good?
Is that okay? Does anybody agree with that?
That's fine. But I do think, I absolutely agree with the city manager, Alderman Nguyen, that what we're looking at, and for years when I sold real estate, I was always concerned that the real estate listings didn't list the particular zoning districts on them, because people do have a right to rely on what zoning district they live in. They have a right to look at the zoning ordinance, read what's allowed in that district, and have a fair expectation of what's going to be occurring near where they live. And I am very concerned about making sure that our zoning ordinance really reflects what we want it to reflect, and not do piecemeal kind of Band-Aid approach to problems. I think the larger issue here is again, as Alderman Wynn said, is what our zoning ordinance is saying.
Well, as long as you're not speaking in the language I don't understand, and when you're talking about our zoning ordinance, you're talking about all the R districts.
I'm talking about our entire zoning
because
ordinance. Right.
Don't
Absolutely.
forget that there are many more people renting today who are of very high quality people who have good incomes, who are renting apartments.
There's no question
just
about
like
that.
they've always been doing it, and I think they are entitled to exactly the same rights and privacies, et cetera, that
Absolutely.
single-family homeowners have.
Yep. Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, that concludes our meeting for this evening.
Are they going to?
Are there any other items for discussion?
There are not.
Are there any communications?
No, ma'am.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you very much. City Council will begin in 5 minutes. That's at 8:50 p.m.